This is it then, the biggest moment of the Call of Duty season and the time when the best players in the world write themselves into the history books. From Infinite Warfare FormaL to Black Ops 4 Simp, we've seen some phenomenal performances over the years on the grandest stage of them all. But which three players do I think could take over the Black Ops Cold War Champs? Well, let me break that down for you in this video. In order to make this a little more interesting, I've not gone with any MVP nominated players, and I've also not gone with any player that I've called out in the last week as a star player, the one to watch, because, well, that would be quite lazy, and we don't do that here. First up then, Jamie Craven, aka Insight, the man for me who is a shoo-in for Rookie of the Year, and without any significant storyline changes, the man who surely deserves to win it. From breaking the CDL S&D record in his first series to being a crucial part of Toronto's rise to the top, Insight could join illustrious company like Kenny and Simp as players who truly took over and transcended during their debut season. Individually, he's putting up some ridiculous figures. He's 5th in hardpoint KD, 1st in the S&Ds, and 4th in control. And overall, across the entire season, across every player, he's 4th in KD with a 1.14. And I know that KD isn't everything, yeah, I know. But multiple times throughout this season, we've spoken about how Insight has taken over, dominated a map, particularly in the S&Ds, just showing the kind of performances that he is putting up aside those numbers. Insight walked into this team just after Major 1 when the team had placed top 8. Following on from that, they got a 1st at Major 2, 3rds at Major 3 and 4, and then a 2nd at Major 5, just one map away from another trophy. I don't really have to remind you of that incredible grand final, but they were within touching distance. His playstyle is more that of a traditional AR. It's a bit slower, posts himself up in the power positions, locks down areas in order to allow his teammates to play around it. And whilst it is without doubt considerably slower than some players in the league, Cammy, Kleenex and Bance love having him as that anchor. They love being able to pivot around him, whilst Insight just makes sure that important areas are dealt with, and of course coming out in the all-important gunfights. The biggest reason I can think of as to why Insight really could take over COD Champs is because he doesn't shy away from the big teams. In fact, if anything, he only gets better. Example being OpTic Chicago. Every time he plays against these guys, he is fantastic. If we look back over every series that Toronto have played against OpTic with Insight in the lineup, Insight's running over a 1.4 in S&Ds and over a 1.13 in the controls. Truly ridiculous statistics to be maintaining over that period of time against that level of players. That's FormaL and Dashi that are shooting back at him, by the way, and he's dealing with it phenomenally. And the grand final where Toronto Ultra fell down and fell apart and all that stuff, Insight still put up a 1.44 across the entire series, across the best of 9. In the hard points alone in that series, he put up a 1.76. That is absolute insanity level of performance, and he's only returned a negative KD from one event so far this year, that being the Stage 3 Major, and I don't see him putting up another one at Champs. Next up then, I'm going with Dashi. Let's face it, this guy's career hasn't exactly peaked as we all thought it would. One tournament win back in Black Ops 4, the only highlight really so far from a man who we thought would be at the very pinnacle of the game back when we saw him burst through in World War II. He's a luxury player. He goes out and shoots better than 99% of the league, right? I think, honestly, only Simp can be put up there as a player who shoots as well as Dashi does. But whereas Simp is lauded as one of the greatest talents of his generation, Dashi gets a bit more of a mixed bag review. He gets a bit more flack from his detractors. In Cold War individually, he's 2nd for hardpoint KD, 3rd for hardpoint damage per 10 minutes, 3rd for control KD, and 2nd overall with a 1.15, just in behind Simp, that man who I mentioned just a moment ago. But even though his KD feats have slowed over the season, he did put up a 1.25 in Major 1, over a 1.3 in Major 3. I actually think it's more impressive to bring home that 1.07 that he did in Major 5. Now, why is that? Well, over his career, Dashi often gets accused of playing the solo game. He goes out, shoots really straight, puts up a ridiculous KD and amount of damage, but how many of those kills were actually effectual? How many of those were done in key rotations? How many of those were done to lock down objective points and see things out for his team? Not enough, typically. But now his game is maturing. He's becoming much more a part of the team, a part of the system, and still putting up some really good figures at the same time. And I think that's terrifying for everybody else, basically, because if Dashi does does learn how to become a very good team player, doesn't need to be the best at it, because he can just partner that with his S-tier gun skill and become a truly frightening factor on the map. Truly the kid that we sat and said he would become all the way back in World War II. I said it last week, they can win champs. OpTic really can. They can come out, smoke New York subliners straight off the bat, and then run over an Atlanta FaZe that are weakened whilst they have the green wall backing them. However, if they are going to do that, Dashi needs to be the star that the green wall have asked for ever since the end of their dynasty days. And my third and final choice, I'm hoping to be a little bit of a wild card here. I'm going with Priestahh. I think it's fair to say that after being released by the Atlanta FaZe and moved over to the Minnesota ROKKR, everyone thought that the ROKKR had obtained a franchise player, an ace in the hole, and he's just been, well, kind of average. No special moments really, no proof of the player that tore up Black Ops 4 on 100 Thieves or was a big part of that early Modern Warfare dominance on Atlanta FaZe. He's just kind of been there really. But that all changed in Stage 5. With his move onto a sub, he is still a flex player, but he's predominantly subbing, saw him return his first positive major of the entire year, going on to a role which is typically harder to hold a good KD, and actually performing better shows how much more comfortable he is there. No surprise then that as he's built this partnership with Standy, it's coincided with ROKKR's first ever championship. And he truly did tear it up at the major, dropping over 1.2s against Atlanta FaZe and the Dallas Empire. Huge series. He wasn't exactly phenomenal against Toronto overall, but if you go back and watch that grand final, or like I did, watch the comeback the next morning, then you will see that once Priestahh got going, that is where it all stemmed from. That is where they started to gain their fire and truly take back what was a ridiculous series. His hard point in particular was very consistent over the major, very good, and as he gets better at understanding Standy and playing on that same wavelength, I just think that this really could be a terrifying duo, one that consistently steps up to take on the best in the league. I do have reservations though about how well ROKKR are going to do at champs. I said when they made that attach and Priestahh swap to make attach more AR and Priestahh more sub, I said they're either going to be one of the best teams in the league or one of the worst. They've shown that the first half of that prophecy is indeed correct, and I think that Priestahh really needs to show his star potential and his star form in order to avoid the second half of that being true. There is a worry here that they could be double-rounded, and I think that it is on Priestahh to come out and do the business to ensure that ROKKR go deep in this tournament.